We have dual goals. In addition to raising funds for actual monetary reparations, or we stated a goal of educating the community about reparations.
For me, on a personal level, very, very important that the work that we do around race, we say that we're doing work around race. Like we are intentional about saying that this is an interracial, multiracial way of experiencing love in our community today. And this is how we're doing it.
So if you create the space for people to do something different, God will work in that space and it will be something that we couldn't have even imagined when we open the space.
Hi, I'm Pat Jackson with Interwoven Congregations, and I want to welcome you to this special video conversation for our Interwoven Congregations quarterly issue on reparations. It features a conversation with members from two congregations in Athens, Georgia. Ebenezer Baptist Church West, led by the Reverend Dr. Darrell Bloodsaw, and Oconee Street United Methodist Church, led by Reverend Mickey Chastain. The seeds of this conversation came from a bus ride. When I was participating with the Georgia Poor People's Campaign March on Washington last summer in June of 2024, and I sat next to Chaplain Cole Napper, who described to me this reparations project in Athens, Georgia, between her congregation, Ebenezer Baptist Church West, and Oconee Street United Methodist Church. Chaplain Cole graciously organized this conversation, which we held in September of 2024, this past fall, inviting Alice Willman and Jo Beth Allen from Oconee Street United Methodist to sit down and for us together to talk about just how this reparations project unfolded. I also want to lift up with great gratitude Hattie Thomas Whitehead, the author of Giving Voice to Linentown, the community in Athens, Georgia, which would become the center of this reparations project. So welcome to this conversation. I hope that you find it illuminating, inspiring, perhaps it might give you ideas of how your faith community can be involved in doing racial justice, perhaps through reparations. Here's our conversation.
And so read a little bit of the history of how Oconee Street had been engaged through your mission committee and task force. Seems going back a few years, 2017, I want to say. Can you describe for me, how was it that the church moved to a point of deciding we want to get involved with reparations in some shape or form?
I'm going to let you, Jo Beth, and Alice talk about the kind of beginnings because I wasn't here for that. And so you all were in doing that work for many years before you connected with Ebenezer, and then so that you can speak to that. And then you were actually connected with Ebenezer before I got to Athens. And so you all can speak to that more than I can.
Well, Oconee Street we call it Oconee Street for short, because it's a mouthful, had a racial justice task force since, I believe, 2017, correct, Jo Beth?
Or 2016, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Somewhere around 2016, 2017, they formed a racial justice task force that had been a way to try and increase the work that we were doing in the community on racial justice. And then
anything precipitate that, Alice, if I could ask?
So the church has a really it was formed right after the Civil War. So we have a racist history, but we also have an anti-racist history. We had the first African-American woman in our conference as a pastor. We've been involved with various local groups that are working for social justice. And so We had sort of the driving force for the Racial Justice Task Force was a religion professor at UGA named Robert Foster. And he had worked with various racial justice groups around the country related to the church's role in anti-racism. And so he started the Racial Justice Task Force. And they connected that task force. Alice and I have both been members of that. Has connected with groups like the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement, the Economic Justice Coalition, and other justice-seeking groups in Athens for a long time, and been involved with quote projects, but hadn't taken on anything as large as the reparations movement. So, but I think it laid a really good foundation for lots of conversations in our Sunday school classes, in church-wide book studies, and that sort of thing. And so the book study that preceded our partnership with Ebenezer West was one that Alice led. So I'll turn it over to you, Alice.
Thanks for that context, Jo Beth, because I didn't get to Oconee Street until 2018. But in 2020, like many congregations across the country, we were, caught up in the reckoning, the racial reckoning that was happening. And many of us decided that as a majority white church, we needed to do some internal reflection. So the Racial Justice Task Force had been kind of externally focused primarily. It was about getting our bodies out into the community more, I would say. And this was a time where we said, what we need to do is we need to spend some time looking inside ourselves and our complicity as white folks and as Christians in white supremacy, and what liberation has to do with our Christian discipleship. So we started interrogating that, and we did a project that we affectionately called Love Your Damn Neighbor. Yeah, I know, it's a great name, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Because we wanted the emphasis to be in the right place, like let's
Damn it.
actually do this now,
Yeah, that's great.
2,000 years later. So we had affinity groups for that. So people met once a month or more. Maybe it was for some groups it was twice a month. And it wasn't just a book study. There was an accountability mechanism built into it where each person was asked to adopt a spiritual discipline that they felt like they could stick to, that had
Nice.
to do with withdrawing their support and their energies and their bodies from the systems of white supremacy. And at the beginning of every gathering, we would report back on how it was going for us and whether we needed any support from the group. So it was really meant to put action, make our faith into works, not just faith.
Can I pause you for a second there? I just appreciate the detail that you're sharing with me, and having been involved in a number of studies with congregations, I'm intrigued by this creative step of adopting a spiritual practice. Would there be any examples that you might think of off the top of your head of some of the things that people did in response to that invitation?
Yes. Well, we made a list of things people might want to consider, and then everyone decided whether they wanted that one or another one they thought of. So, for example, it could be looking at your finances and how you were spending your money and trying to withdraw your money from support for things that perpetuate white supremacism and put it towards things that support liberation. It could also be putting your body in a new and uncomfortable place. So showing up to a demonstration, going to our Court Watch program, which is a program we have at the church where people spend the day in court just observing what goes on in our legal system.
Yep.
Other people chose to, I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. They were like money, putting your body in new places.
Prayer. We tapped into United Methodist social action group that has anti-racism calendar of prayers and calendar of events and that sort of thing, and sharing those things with the congregation. We have a very detailed welcome statement, and so some people focused on living out our welcome statement. And we can share that welcome statement with you
Great.
if you'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah.
One is develop it, and this isn't a spiritual practice exactly, but it's develop a 12-step program for recovery from racism. I just like that one.
Mhm. Well, even just framing these things as spiritual disciplines, which are embodied spiritual disciplines, doing things, but in a spiritual frame. I appreciate that. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then you would check in with people and you would say, this week I really found it hard to do this. And then people would say, okay, how can we support you? Maybe we go together, or maybe we, and that was it, because nobody gets out of the habit. You don't get out of a habit all by yourself. You really do have to have a community. And what we were trying to do was, as a community, learn new ways of loving each other.
Okay.
And so from that, from the Love Your Damn Neighbor project, we did a survey at the beginning and at the end, and we found that, we had a pretty good chunk of people that already were thinking about financial reparations as part of our church's journey. But after we did that project, we had almost 100% that said they were ready. So,
Really?
yes. And so then
Did you query folks and say, okay, what's next? And, here's 5 options, or again,
no.
appreciate just understanding your process.
So we queried people about whether they would be open to it, but then we intentionally did not just present them with options. After that, we decided, we consulted with people in the community, Black folks in the community, and we said, this is where we're at, and we think we want to do something, but we don't want to just do something, and we don't want to just decide what the something is without any input, right? And so we started talking to people, and the first thing we heard was partnerships and relationships are the most important thing. And so you need to build those relationships and do something together with a Black congregation, or at least with Black folks in the community in some way, because we don't need any more white people just coming in and throwing money at stuff or throwing themselves in the middle of things. And the second thing we heard was, be careful what you call this. Think carefully about the word reparations. And I know that word has become a lot more common and a lot less scary to white folks even in the last 4 years, but it was still quite a trigger
Edgy.
word. And also, for a lot of the folks that we consulted that were ADOS people, they were like, listen, reparations needs to be a federal program. It needs to be reparations for slavery, and it needs to be comprehensive. And if you come along and call this little thing you're doing from your church reparations, the risk is that you're going to dilute what it means. And the risk is that white people are going to think they did something about reparations, and they did something, but what they did was tiny.
Yep.
And so we got lots of good advice like that. And so from that, we started a conversation. Well, we had a conversation with Ebenezer Church anyway, but we kind of re-energized that conversation, I would say, and decided to do a book study together as two congregations.
So I'm sorry. So there was an existing relationship between the two congregations on some level that
On some level.
went back a little bit.
Yeah, the pastors had a relationship, and I think Robert Foster had a relationship because of the Racial Justice Task Force work.
What's the physical distance between the congregations?
About
2 miles?
2 miles. Yeah.
Okay.
And so from that, the pastor, the senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church West, Reverend Darrell Bloodsaw, he really wanted to do something on liberation theology. So broader than just racial justice, but looking at liberation theology writ large. And so we decided to read a book by Dr. McMickle, which was called Let the Oppressed Go Free, which you might be familiar with. So it touched on a lot of different, there was feminist and womanist and Latin American liberation theology. There was also was there queer theology in there?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was. So yeah, there was many different types of liberation theology, and we did that over a year, I think, right? And then eventually brought him to meet with us, brought the author to meet with us, and had a beautiful gathering.
So can I ask what was the level and degree of engagement across the Oconee Street Church in these efforts?
I was just looking up for the LYDN project. There were 55 people, and our at the time, I think our church had a membership of 120, and that, counts children. So, and there were a few people from outside the church that participated in that. But then when we did the combined for Let the Oppressed Go Free, that was pretty much equal numbers from Ebenezer and Oconee Street, and every group in that was made up of approximately equal numbers from each church. I think it was around the same, around 50 probably.
I think it
Total,
was somewhere between
total
40 and
between the
50%
two
total.
congregations coming together. So 25-ish from each congregation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And not all the same people either. There were some people that did one and not the other.
And then just one sort of hinge part of that is at the end, we all said, how do we enact the kind of theology that we have been studying and embracing? And each group came up with its own potential actions. And across those groups, several of the groups mentioned exploring reparations, figuring out what that might look like. And so we felt like that gave us an impetus for moving forward with reparations.
Okay. So you get that feedback, and then what do you do with that? What did you do next?
Well, that's when, as Alice said, that we started interviewing especially African-American members of the community who, many of whom we already had a relationship with through the Racial Justice Task Force. So members of AADM, the Athens Anti-Discrimination Movement, and others. So to get their take on
I
it.
think it's really important, this orientation of engaging people in the community.
Yeah, and I know that we did interviews with or conversations with several pastors of predominantly Black churches to get their take on reparations also, and just tried to gather as much information as we could. But a critical piece here is that Oconee Street then formed a reparations action committee. And that
Okay.
was the forerunner of ARA.
Mhm.
And it was we hired Hattie Thomas Whitehead, who wrote the book about Town that you may have looked at on our website. It was a very influential book. Many people in our congregation and several groups read her book about Town, which was the community that was wiped out by urban renewal that we ended up focusing on for our reparations action. So her leadership was really critical to everything that we did. So the biggest example that I can think of is that, as we read about other places in the country that were doing reparations, like Evanston and a couple of churches, one in Cambridge, and some other places. Some places were doing helping with home down payment. Some people were establishing scholarships, and we were thinking, well, so should we do something like that? And Hattie said very clearly, no, this is money that is owed because of money that was stolen from people who were forced out of their homes and not adequately compensated. So it is lost generational wealth that is owed to these families who are homeowners in Town.
And does Hattie have a relationship with either of the congregations?
Yes, she's a member of Ebenezer.
How did you choose who to talk to in the community?
Well, I think we started with people that we already knew were leaders in the community and we had some relationship with through the Racial Justice Task Force and through other kind of community service work, and then sort of asked them, who else do you think we should talk with? We didn't, I mean, I don't want to say that we did like extensive consultations and talked to everybody, but we kind of, I don't know, we probably talked to maybe 8 or 9 people that we really trusted and that wanted to talk to us.
Okay, so you do Let the Oppressed Go Free. there's a sense among the groups that they want to do something around reparations, leads to the formation of the group at Oconee Street. And Chaplain Cole, are you on the scene yet at Ebenezer? And I'm just wondering if you have, even if you weren't there, if you have any kind of institutional sense of where was Ebenezer in this process, and um, how was this initiative received in the Ebenezer community?
As I recall, um, the conversation had already been started. Like they said, there was a relationship between the pastor of Ebenezer and the pastor of Oconee Street. And um, but at the time, COVID, I mean, we were really in the grip of COVID at this time. I got here
Yeah.
in 2020, and this was 2021, I think, when we were doing this. And their pastor, who is since moved on to a different congregation here in town, was her mother caught COVID and eventually died from COVID.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was congregation led, and led by the leadership of these two women, and we're very, very grateful for that. But um, we weren't doing any in-person events. Everything was being done via Zoom. Um, and so it felt a little uh, dis dis discombobulated. Um, there was for instance, our church was still meeting in the Clark Central High School parking lot for our Sunday services at the time. We weren't doing any face-to-face, I don't think, until 2022, maybe. Um, and so it just left this there was this sense of, yes, we're doing these things together between our congregations, but I kind of got here during the middle of all that and just started helping out wherever I felt that I could, um, and bringing people in to work on the different um, what did we call them? Working groups, book study groups. Um, we had, I think, around 5 or 6 different groups of congregants, and we made sure that that we had a good balance between uh, members of Ebenezer and members of Oconee Street, to make sure that we had good, robust conversations about these topics. And I just remember feeling like this is really good stuff. Um, and the fact that it was being driven by people who really wanted to be there, who really wanted to have these conversations, just felt really incredibly powerful. And so I, I would say that uh, there was nothing but love from my congregation to the Oconee Street United Methodist Church congregation. In every working group, every book study group that we had, people were really excited about it and really wanting to delve deeper into these conversations about the different types of liberation theologies and how they
Mm.
all um, converged. And so I think that there was a lot of good energy, at least from Ebenezer's side.
Okay, so you've done the book study and you've formed the reparations group in Oconee Street. I guess from the book that you had read around Lindentown, was there a kind of a process or a time where you remember that's how you settled on what the reparations project would be?
I mean, we had a lot of conversations about that, and it was because it's such a massive thing to think about
Yeah.
reparations, right? I mean, where do you start? And on one hand, where do you start? And then on the other hand, like how much can one small community do?
Mhm.
And so we were trying to find something that we could actually accomplish that would not be insulting, but without, yeah, that something that was big enough to not be insulting, but that wasn't so big that we wouldn't be able to accomplish it. And so we had the benefit of, kind of the convergence of three things, I would say. I mean, one was that Hattie was all over town talking about Town, and people were becoming familiar with that, with what had happened, and and what the history really had been, and what the challenges were to reparations for the compensation for what had been stolen from them. And then at the same time, you had our city, because of the pressure from Hattie and other people, our city had decided to adopt a resolution on Town and go as far as the city could go, our city government, in repairing that harm. So they did as much as they could do, but they could not pay direct compensation to the families. So we had both of those things happening. Plus, we had a church community from Oconee Street that was really riled up about wanting to do financial reparations, and the support and partnership with Ebenezer. So all of those things kind of coming together, it made sense that we focus on this one case of Town because it's airtight. I mean, when it happened, it was so meticulously documented by University of Georgia and the city of Athens. Everything is in the court records. There's
Wow.
no, there is no dispute about what happened and who was wronged and how much they were underpaid. That is that there's been no contention about that. So we knew exactly who was living in the houses at the time that they were forced off the land. And it would just made a really clear-cut case that we could do something about. So we decided we would limit the reparations to the descendants, the first descendants of those homeowners that were on the land when it happened. And we would try to keep it simple and just raise as much money as we could. We gave ourselves 2 years because we thought we needed some time to get the word out and kind of socialize people to what this was, because this hasn't been done before. And yeah, and so then away we went with that. But that, there were plenty of other communities that we could have looked at, but we didn't have the data
Hmm.
to be able to make such a clear case for it.
You have a sense of how many families you're talking about in terms of trying to track in terms of who might be the descendants that would
Well,
be
we know
involved?
exactly, and that's kind of the fourth leg to this chair that Alice just built, and that is the work of Joey Carter, who is a researcher at UGA, who did give us an exact list of it was 11 families. We were able to make contact with 10 of those families. So the reparations were paid to 18 people who were first descendants, or in one case, a beneficiary of a woman who was actually a homeowner, and she died at 102 after we started this process. So
Wow.
her beneficiaries received the reparations. So his role in researching that, and he and Hattie worked together very closely. So she had that data that shared with us. So in that sense, as Alice said, it was just an airtight kind of situation. We left it open so that anybody else could say, wait a minute, I fit in that category too. And we've had a couple of people since the distribution of reparations who said, I think that I'm owed reparations. And then we've had conversations with them and said, yes, you went through a terrible, terrible loss, but it's our criteria are pretty narrow, and it has to be Black homeowners with living first descendants.
When you charted this course of action, what kind of interaction did you have with the families? And what were you looking for? Were you looking for any guidance from the families in any way, or was it, I want to meet with you and let you know this is what's happening? How did that kind of play out?
That was one of the most amazing parts of this whole journey, really, was getting to sit
Yes,
with the descendants. And they were nothing but gracious and welcoming. And, it stirred up some stuff that some of them hadn't thought about in a while. not an easy thing to bring up. And
Yeah.
there's been a lot of conflict and a lot of, conflict between siblings and just like, I mean, you can imagine it tore families up. And so bringing that up 60 years later, not great, but everybody was so, so welcoming and gracious to us. So we approached as many as we could, and we just said, look, we understand, we think we understand what happened, and we've learned about this, and we want to do this thing, and we want to invite you to be a part of it. You don't have to apply. We really wanted intentionally to build a process where we did not require people to prove that they had been harmed, because a lot of things that are being called reparations today, people have to go through this process to prove eligibility, and there's some harm that gets done in having to fill out the forms again and argue your case, right? So because of the work of Joey Carter, like Joe Beth said, we could go to these folks and say, we know what happened. We know how much your family was underpaid. This is what we're trying to do. If you're interested, then all you have to do is say yes, and we're going to do what we can. And it ended up often that we were at their kitchen tables, for a long time, hearing their stories and hearing how it had been for them. And we got to be friends in some cases. And it was I think that was like something that we could not have anticipated how wonderful that was going to be.
Yeah, I maybe each of us can talk about one family or one family member that we formed a relationship, because all three of us were actively involved, along with Pat Moody, who couldn't be here today, in maintaining close connections with members of the families. And Alice touched on this, but you asked, so I want to go back to that. In our very first conversation, we said, tell me your story. Tell me what you remember. Tell me what your thoughts are about reparations. So, and then we took extensive notes on those conversations. And as Alice did our wonderful monthly newsletters, we would include stories from first descendants so that they were speaking to our donors and others who were interested in learning more about reparations from the people who were harmed. So I don't know, Chaplain Cole, who comes to your mind when you think about connections?
I mean, I just think about, I guess, broadly all of them. So we had about 10 families, Pat, that we ended up working with, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it was 10 families.
Yeah.
Uh, and I realized as we worked on the project that I knew a lot of the families. Like, I didn't
Mm.
realize that I knew them. For instance, Freddie Mae Jackson Brown. Um, I think I've got all of her names in there. She uh, is, I guess, in her 80s, and she uh, is a first descendant um, whose daughter, well, first of all, she went to Spelman, which is my alma mater. So we were connected in that way. But her daughter also served as the superintendent of the local public schools district here for, I don't know, a few years. And then her daughter um, is my little sister at Spelman, because they sent her daughter to Spelman. Um, and so it's just, being able to find all of these different connections to Black folks here in my hometown that I didn't even know that I was connected to. And that's just one example of the 10. But I think that I found um, there was another family where I had gone to school, not only school, elementary, middle, and high school with one of the um, living descendants' daughters. So um, it was really cool to see all of this history um, and all of these connections, and I think it really helped um, accentuate the connections that we had with each other as well. We really worked on, particularly the past. So I think we talked about this, but we spent 2 years actively fundraising for the big payout, and really the last
Internally and externally, both internally and externally, I take it.
I don't know how much internal fundraising we did, but yes, I would say yes. I don't know. Alice, Joe Beth.
Well, that is an interesting piece. Our church committed and paid out $10,000 of the 120,000 that we ended up raising. So internally, yes, we did work. If that's what you mean by internally, we did work within our church.
Mhm.
But the last year we worked, I mean, the three of us probably spoke at least once a day. I mean, not, you know,
Gosh.
but with text messages, emails, um, just multiple times per day, trying to make sure that we had every aspect of the ceremony, which is where we cut checks and gave them out to families. It was so powerful and so meaningful to each of us for different reasons. But then collectively, it really brought us together as sisters in this community and in this work. And we are excited, I think, for what comes next. We know that we have worked together well in the past, and we've made a difference. Maybe not, you know, the greatest difference. Maybe not, the best thing in the world, but it was powerful and it was meaningful to the people that we were able to do this work for. And I, for one, am extraordinarily proud of the work that we did. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
I wanted to mention, I was thinking back because your focus is very much on interweaving congregational gifts and strengths. And one of the things that we did was contact over a dozen local congregations. And we had conversations with um, 5 or 6 pastors and church leaders, asking if we could have a conversation with either the whole congregation or small groups within those congregations. And some of those were both very meaningful and very productive in terms of the fundraising. Chaplain Cole and Alice spoke at the Congregation Children of Israel, for example. And they also spoke at the Unitarian Universalist congregation. Others of us did small groups at the downtown United Methodist Church, the big Methodist Church here, and other congregations. So in some cases, like the Unitarians actually took up congregational wide donations and made a large donation. In other cases, we felt like we didn't get a whole lot of response, but then in one place we had one response, but it was $10,000. So it wasn't from the church, it was from an individual in the church. So it, but the other point about that, reaching out to congregations, is that we have dual goals. In addition to raising funds for actual monetary reparations, we felt like we stated a goal of educating the community about reparations. And in the initial phase, specifically about Lennontown. And so when we talked with a congregation or a small neighborhood group or a civic group or whatever it was that we were talking to, if we didn't raise a nickel, it was still a part of our mission to share the information.
I think that's fantastic. Chaplain Cole, you talked about the relationships between the three of you, and I'm wondering, what did this project do for the relationship between Ebenezer and Oconee Street?
For me, Ebenezer is the church that I grew up in, and so special to me because when I came back home after being gone for so many years, I mean, I hadn't lived in Athens really since I graduated from high school when I was 18, so I was gone for really 30 years. And so coming back to Athens after all that time and coming to uh, my family's home church was a big deal. I do a lot as a member of the congregation for my church, but I have no official leadership role. But what this did was give me the opportunity to jump in, the expression get in where you fit in. So I felt like uh, helping with the church, my church, connect with this other church in a very meaningful way. And for me, a lot of that meaning came from the interracial aspect. Um, it's so, particularly what was it? I came home in 2020. So we had, Ahmaud Arbery in February, George Floyd in May, Breonna Taylor, right? All of that happening in 2020, and so many um, feelings being stirred up in our country and in our community. It felt really, really important at the time. And then looking back, even more so now, um, to do work that was intentionally interracial. And I think that Reverend Dr. McMickle, who wrote the book Let the Oppressed Go Free, which I think was the choice to do that book was came from my pastor because I think Dr. McMickle at one point had been a mentor to my pastor, um, but it was a joint decision by both pastors. When the author, Dr. McMickle, came to visit our joint community to talk about the book study that we had done, um, and to engage us in a conversation about that book study and about the book itself. I think Dr. McMickle had said something to the effect of, I don't think this has been done anywhere else in the country where someone has taken my book and spoken about it in an intentionally interracial way. That to me felt pretty cool. It is, for me, on a personal level, very, very important that the work that we do around race, we say that we're doing work around race. Like we are intentional about saying that this is an interracial, multiracial way of experiencing love in our community today. And this is how we're doing it. This is how we are choosing to do it as people of faith,
Hmm.
as people who love the Lord and truly want to be brothers and sisters to each other. This is how we're doing it, and that to me is pretty powerful and important.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that very much. I wanted to ask the question of what was the biggest challenge about this effort, um, and what was actually turned out to be easier than you thought. I'll start with that. Then my other companion to that is, what advice do you have for other congregations who are thinking, contemplating, gee, we'd like to do something in the, that would engage the issue of reparations in some way. So challenges, what was easier, and then thoughts, suggestions, advice for other congregations.
I'll start off. For me, I think that it's really important that people that want to engage in this type of work that they acknowledge the harm first. Like start off with saying harm was done. That is a fact. And if we can't acknowledge that harm was done, then you don't even need to be doing this work. because we're not being truthful with ourselves. And I didn't know. I think that there was a lot of hidden history for me with as educated as I feel I am. There was just so much about American history that I just didn't know before the age of George Floyd, which for me was 2020, before Ahmaud Arbery, before Breonna Taylor, this history of violence against Black people in this country. I didn't understand or appreciate it, but now that I do understand it better in a broader sense, it helps connect me to this work of harm that isn't necessarily, violent in the sense of physical violence, but it is violent in the sense of the intergenerational harm, which is in and of itself is its own type of violence. And so acknowledging that harm right from the beginning, I would say is crucial.
What was to stay with you, Chaplain Cole? What would you identify as, this was the most challenging part of this undertaking?
If I had to say right off, um, I would say that I don't like being uncomfortable. And I think that talking about race is an uncomfortable thing. It's not comfortable, it's not easy. And you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and wanting to talk
Yeah.
about these things. And I think Alice hit on it earlier when she said something to the effect of, um, 4 years ago, people didn't want to talk about the word reparations, right? But and I had nothing to do with the name. So I give it all up to the Oconee Street folks. They intentionally put the word reparations in the name. It's right there in the title. So we
Yep.
had to say it a million times. We said it 2 million, 10 million times over the past 2 years that we were going out intentionally into the community and asking for donations, reparations. This is what, and so I would say that would be something that was hard, but also transformative. And I give Oconee Street, both Alice and Joe Beth and other members who made that decision, a lot of credit for doing so.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chaplain Cole. Joe Beth, how about for you? Biggest biggest challenge of this project? If you want something that turned out to be easier than you thought, and if I had a tip to give to another congregation.
I think initially I was really worried about the sensibilities of the descendants and uh, how they would feel about this effort. Whether I was worried right up to the end and continue to worry that the amount of money that because we ended up giving 12,000, writing checks for $12,000 per family. But in one family, there were 4 descendants. So that was only 3,000 a person. So I was worried that the amount was insulting. I think Alice mentioned that earlier, that we stewed about, and we didn't even know we were going to get up to 12,000. We set a much lower goal earlier, and then we raised it, and then we raised it again. So I think that was one of my big concerns, that it would have meaning in some way. As Alice mentioned, the people that we established and maintained relationships with who were first descendants said something to the effect, I'll quote one of them. Bobby Crook said, "Well, it's something." And I mean, several of them said, no, it's not much, but it's something. And the fact that then he went on to say, with tears rolling down his cheeks, that he never thought that he and his family would be recognized, that his mother, who he held her picture up that his mother would stand on ground called Linentown Lane that was renamed by the city, that runs through the dorms where their homes were destroyed. And when he spoke at the reparations ceremony at Ebenezer Baptist Church West, making similar comments of just having this moment of recognition, because their history had been silenced. It had been wiped out. Not only did 99% of the white population of Athens not know it, way too many of the African American descendants, even from Linentown or from other communities within Athens, didn't know it. It wasn't talked about in schools. It was certainly not written in history. It was just wiped out. So I would say that was the thing that may have been most rewarding.
Yeah. Alice, how about for you?
For me, the biggest challenge was the fear of doing further harm. To me, the hardest thing was inside myself. And as a descendant of settlers, as a person who, I've got all the way back in my family, it's European, German descent. I mean, I'm about as white as you can get. And it's not in our DNA as white folks in the United States to repair harm. It's not something we know how to do. It's not something we have practices and traditions to do. And so we're not very good. That's not that we're not good at it. It's just that we have not done it and we don't have the muscle memory to repair harm. And I've heard it said that for people who are trying to break cycles, perfectionism is one of the biggest blocks. And that definitely happened with me. I was scared a lot that I was going to say the wrong thing, not say the right thing, speak when I shouldn't speak, not speak when I should speak. I didn't sometimes know how to be in this space because it wasn't modeled for me. I didn't grow up with it, and I don't have the neurons in my brain to know how to navigate some of the situations that we were in. And so I would sometimes just be paralyzed with the fear of really screwing this up. And the only thing that kept me going was our relationships. I got some feedback from, when I said things that were harmful, I got feedback from my sister, Chaplain Cole. I got feedback from Patty Whitehead, and it was loving feedback. And the reason I got that feedback in a loving way is because we had a relationship.
Hmm.
And they knew my better self, and they could speak to my better self, right, in a loving way. And it's made me a better person. So that's been the most rewarding thing about it, is just to be in relationship with these amazing people and be able to learn and grow and to know that nobody's done this before. So we're just, as Hattie would always say, we're going hand in hand, and these are uncharted waters, and we're doing it together the best we can.
So, but for the two of you, Joeth and Alice, any tips for other congregations wondering about going down this path in some way?
I mean, I think I would say that open the space, create the space for people to step into and see what happens. But
And
don't be too prescriptive in, it has to be this way, because we don't, like I said, it's not been done before. We're not good at this. We're building the muscle memory as we go as a society. So if you create the space for people to do something different, God will work in that space, and it will be something that we couldn't have even imagined when we open the space.
Thank you. Joeth?
I think it's kind of obvious from everything we've been talking about, but definitely encourage churches to form partnerships with predominantly Black churches, predominantly white churches, and if around the issues of reparations, that would be the two kinds of congregations specifically. That is a genuine partnership, that is one that has space to evolve, one that has mechanisms to evolve, like the book study. We did community, and again, Alice and Chaplain Cole led this community conversations every month at a local brewery. And those community conversations brought a lot of people in just to talk. it wasn't a money-raising event. It was a chance for people to talk about reparations, and it didn't focus just on Lenontown. It focused on reparations writ large, and what else should Athens as a community be looking at in terms of reparations, and what are other people doing elsewhere in terms of reparations. So having that conversation beyond the church walls, but as a very basic, yes, it would be possible for a white church to kind of charge ahead and do several of the steps that we did. But the core of it is the relationship between our two churches doing this together, that there's leadership from both churches, and the so for example, at the ceremony, the Checo writing ceremony that was hosted at Ebenezer West, and it was one of the most interracial moments in a church that I've been in in Athens, and I've lived here for 38 years, and I've been in lots of churches, including my own. That you just don't usually have an interracial congregation gathered like that. So I think that part of it's just essential.
My last question is, what next? Do you
We
think?
don't know. We had a meeting last month to start looking at this. We agreed that we need quite some time, that we don't want to jump into anything. And we agree that the leadership on this should come from African Americans in the Athens-Clarke County community who have been harmed and for whom reparations are most salient, instead of, our small think tank saying, well, we could do this or we could do that. So we don't know if that will be a series of panel discussions, forums, more informal conversations. We don't know what that's going to look like.
Any other thoughts around that, Alice or Chaplain Cole? Yeah.
One thing that I've been thinking about that I want to do, well, two things. One is we can't let the University of Georgia off the hook. I mean, I think that they're probably like, we had these rabble rousers, and they, stirred up a bunch of stuff for, but, people have gotten their checks and people have moved on. We can't let them off the hook. They still have so much responsibility. And then the second thing is, I think that whatever we do next needs to be around education. So it needs to be, we are, Athens, Georgia is home to the University of Georgia, which is not only the state's flagship university, it is what they say is either the very first or one of the first three land grant universities in the country. And because of that history of education, it seems to me that we have to, whatever we do next, has to be focused around education and how we educate this next generation so they're not as dumb as I was. They don't have to learn about these things later on. They can learn about them when they're much younger. So those are my thoughts.
I'm just really grateful for you sharing what this experience has been for the two congregations, and charting out kind of what steps and actions you took, how you thought about it, and how it bore out. So I'm just really want to thank you so much for giving a tangible story that I think folks will find very relatable. And that comment, which I know you took as almost an aside, but it's something, there's so many folks who don't do anything. And so to do something, I think is pretty doggone great. And I know you're thinking, well, what else? And there needs to be more, but I just want to join in celebrating the action that you were intentional about taking. to what degree does what you did open up doors, if only in people's minds, of reparations are possible? We saw it happen. Needs to happen on a bigger scale yet, but we saw it happen in this instance. Chaplain Cole, again, just thank you so much for making this possible, and just for your kindness and sharing the story with me on the bus. And Alice and JoBeth, thank you so much for your time and sharing, just for everything that you've done in your personal life ministries there. And just appreciate so much you sharing this with me.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Pat.
Great, fantastic. Thank
Thanks,
you.
JoBeth. Thank you.
Uh,